Hey everyone, I'm Father Alexander Hart, Rector of St. John the Divine Episcopal Church in Sun City Center.
And I am the Reverend David Marshall, Rector of All Angels by the Sea on Longboat Key, Florida. It's a beautiful day.
Ah, I'm sure it's a beautiful day. It's maybe a good weather forecast out there.
Yes, and come out and see me would be great. But today we're here and we're going to bridge our knowledge
Bridge our
of the
knowledge of the
gospel.
scriptures, bridge our theological knowledge. It's not college football season yet, so we're not bridging that just yet, but we're hoping soon.
Are you talking about like college football like this?
Yes, I left my hat at Dave's house, and
Mm-hmm.
Dave is proving that his brain is bigger than mine, and that's why the hat won't fit on his head.
Well, you and I fit very well together as friends. Our heads are not the same shape. I can't. I mean, I could try. I actually tried backwards. Oh, that's even worse. I mean, sorry. I'll just
Let's
put it
not
over
say
there
we
where it
didn't.
goes. We had a wonderful Independence Day 4th of July celebration. It was great to have you and your family over. That was
Yeah,
fantastic. We had
it
a
was
great
great to
time.
be
We
there
talked
with.
about AI. We covered so many topics. It was wonderful.
Yeah,
So yeah. But this
but
week,
today
yeah,
we've actually got an interesting thing because we have a story that is very familiar. I mean,
to
if
you
you
and
have
me,
not, what?
to you and me.
Well, to you and I, yeah. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
if you as a Christian have not heard this story, then we are so glad to be presenting it to you for the first time.
Yes. Yeah.
It is the parable of the Good Samaritan, and it's found in Luke's Gospel, chapter 10. And just to set the the stage here, Dave,
Mm-hmm.
Jesus has been preaching and teaching, and then a lawyer stands up. Sorry, lawyers, if you're the foil in this week's story. And he says, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And we did check, it is the term inherit.
To inherit. Yeah.
And Jesus kind of puts it back on the lawyer and say, well, what's written in the law? You're a person under the law. What does it say that the law says you have to do? And
Mm-hmm.
he says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your strength, and your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus says, well, you've given the right answer. I mean, you plugged in the formula. You got it. Do this and you will live. But the lawyer, wanting to justify himself, asked, but who is my neighbor?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is where the story significantly turns,
Okay.
because the lawyer sought to justify himself. And what does that mean that he sought to justify himself, Dave?
Well, that's a really good question. And my guess is that today we have a lot of preachers listening because they are like, I can't believe I have to preach on the parable of the Good Samaritan yet again. And
Right.
so, what Alex and I are going to attempt to do is to give you a new look on something that a lot of people know. And if you are listening and you are not a preacher, um, we also will be attempting to shed some light on this, to give some practical ways that we can live today in our society where, uh, if I can, and we never ever talk about politics. Um, the country at this point, as the country has been asking for the last 249 years, uh, who is my neighbor, right? That
Right.
this is a really really important question
Yeah.
for
And I
us
think
to dive
that
into.
that question that the lawyer gets up and asks is a question that's in our hearts, on our minds, on the tip of our tongues as we walk
Yes.
around daily life.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
we may as Christians say, well, I know who my neighbor is. My neighbor is everybody. Yes, that is true.
Hmm.
However, what does that mean in the way that I treat people? And do I need to be reminded of that from time to time?
Hmm.
And so I pose that question again. What does it mean that the lawyer was trying to justify himself?
Okay, so I have this fantastic resource, and it is called the Jewish Annotated New Testament. And so
Ah,
it
okay.
is putting in the first century rabbinic teaching and the importance of what folks were talking about, a part of the Jewish faith in the first century, and what they were actually wrestling with this particular phrase is the sense of who is a person like me, or who is yourself. We could try to translate it as who is a fellow human being. And when you ask that, and then you go back to Torah, bear in mind that some of the teaching back then, there was this phrase that they would use. And the phrase is this: the one who has gotten the teachings of Torah has himself gotten life eternal. So the one who has the teachings of Torah has life eternal. If you can embrace teachings of Torah, you now have life eternal. So the sense of, if you ask Torah, who is a similar human being like me?
Right.
Torah will respond that in God's image we were made. All were made.
But what
Okay.
I'm hearing though in the question, and of
Hmm.
course the question can't be, untied or unmoored from the answer that Jesus gives,
Right.
is that my neighbor, it's kind of like two tiers. There's
Okay.
the people who are like me, the people that I see all the time, the people who believe as me,
Hmm.
in as a person of faith. And then there's this outer circle around
Hmm.
me of
Hmm.
people who are not similar to me. And justifying myself can sometimes look like making sure that I have a good relationship first with the people who are like me, and then a relationship with the people who are not like me.
Okay. Yes. And to justify himself, the again, the Greek way of looking at this is to pronounce righteousness on himself.
Right.
So the man was saying, in other words, I've helped these people around me. So who is not my neighbor, right? And
Right.
then Jesus said, "Hold on to your hat. I'm going to blow your mind. Hold on to your hat. I'm going to I'm going to blow your mind on this, because I'm
Yeah.
going to start talking about someone who normally you wouldn't expect the Spirit of God to work through, a Samaritan." And so that was the expanding idea that when Torah says we were made in God's image, Torah meant everybody, and it wasn't just those in your tribe, those in your family, those in your profession, but even Samaritans, even those who um, would be looked down upon by others.
Or who look down upon you. I mean,
Well, true, right?
the
Yeah.
Samaritans look down on the Jewish people.
Oh,
But
yeah,
I
that's true.
but but I think at the core of this, though, before we get into the parable itself, is this notion that we have these concentric circles that we use of influence over us, of people we have influence over, these concentric circles of love.
Okay.
And it is a radical notion presented by Jesus to eliminate these concentric circles, to say that the person, so for example, right, to treat a stranger on the street the
Mm-hmm.
same way that I would treat you is a radical notion,
Mm-hmm.
because you're my friend. You
Right.
have the status of a person who can go into my fridge and pull whatever you want out.
Yeah.
Not everybody can do that,
Right.
right? But the notion that there are no longer concentric circles, that it is just humanity, and
Uh-huh.
humanity is loved by God all equally, and
Mm-hmm.
that all have to be treated equally, is a radical notion.
Mm-hmm. It is. And the thing, so we just came off of Independence Day weekend, right? So I have this idea of the Declaration of Independence that's been rolling around in
Yeah.
my head. And and Alex, you and I talked about this briefly yesterday on the phone. He and I both have political science degrees, so we'd like to have interesting conversations not recorded about such things. So Torah said that we're made in God's image. Jesus is underlying everybody's your neighbor. And then there was this long period of history where it was never written like that again, until signed July 4th, 1776. It says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, people, are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty,
Liberty.
the pursuit of happiness, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among us, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed, not from the divine right of kings." And so this is radical language. So we had Jesus talking about Good Samaritans, and now that moved, in my opinion, into this Declaration of Independence, which is an incredible document that we need to read a lot more. Talking about who is my neighbor, how are we created, and what truths are self evident. So Jesus is going to talk about a man who was walking down the hill from Jerusalem to Jericho,
Hmm.
and he was robbed, he was stripped, he was beaten, and left away to die.
Yep.
Um, and that uh, in that notion, there are people that pass by, and there was somebody who decided to help. The truth that is self evident in this is that there's somebody who needs help, and it is evident. Yet there are some that pass by without helping. But there was a Samaritan while traveling came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity.
So let's give a little bit of context here about some of the elements of this parable.
Okay.
So, first of all, when you're going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, if you've ever seen what that road might have looked like, it's a lot of kind of blind alleys. You know, you're going these turns where people will hide.
Hmm.
You know, highwaymen, as we would call them, brigands, vagabonds, would hide and attack you. Sometimes people would pose as somebody who's already hurt so that somebody would go over and try to help them. Hey, are you okay? And somebody would come out and pounce on them.
Hmm.
So this person who's laying there, right, maybe they're really hurt, maybe they're not. Why are you walking alone? You don't walk alone in this day and age of going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. So it's your own fault that you got attacked. You know, these are ideas that people are using to justify, right?
Hmm.
And what's interesting is that Jesus, in every parable, Jesus tries to, as a reflection of the kingdom, turn things upside down.
Right.
And so, who are the heroes and who are the people who do not do what they're supposed to be doing? So, first of all, a priest, and I always love pointing to myself during this homily of after this reading and saying the priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side.
Hmm.
Very convenient, right? I'm not even going to walk by the situation. I'm going to avoid the situation entirely and just walk on the other side, right? And
And folks,
then,
if I can interrupt Alex for a
yeah,
brief moment,
hmm,
sometimes clergy are conflict avoidant,
hmm,
so you
right.
can
You know,
you can go real deep into this thing about the priest being
yeah.
conflict avoidant and crossing by on the other side.
And then the Levite, which would be kind of like the lay priest person, you know, a very devout person, does the same thing.
Yeah, so the Levites were the temple priests. They were the ones. It's a small tribe from Levi, and
That's right.
that they were in Jerusalem for a particular reason, serving at the temple. So it wasn't just simply a priest. This is a high classification of people. So
Yep.
Zechariah, Elizabeth, they are Levites. They also didn't survive well. Um, anyway, well, later on we'll
Well,
talk about
so,
Levi.
but in other words, yet a second person who should have known better,
Sorry.
right? Who
Uh-huh.
maybe didn't want to didn't want to be late for the 10 a.m. service,
Right.
right? People will be
Mhm.
upset if I'm late, right?
Mhm.
And
Well,
then
Levites
here
have to remain
comes,
clean as well, so,
right, they have to remain clean. So then
yeah.
here comes, of course, now the hero, the Samaritan. So the
Mhm.
Samaritans are, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, but they're the group that during the Babylonian exile, they're left behind,
Mhm.
right? And they intermix with the people that are left behind, with with the surrounding people who are not Jewish, right?
Okay.
And when the Jewish people come back, they're like, "Hey, we're back. We're going to build the temple over here." And the Samaritans say, "Well, first of all, we've been here. We're worshiping on Mount Gerizim. Go ahead.
We already have a temple, thank you. Yeah.
We already have a temple. Thank you. We're
Yeah.
good." And the Jewish people thought that, well, you have intermarried and intermixed, so you are no longer pure.
Wow.
That's the kindest way I can say that.
Okay. Which isn't that
Um,
kind, but yes, it's,
well, there's
that's one
words
way to
that they
say it.
used that were not appropriate. Um,
Correct, yes.
yes.
So if
So,
we can talk about geography real quick,
mhm,
So, Jewish, Judean, the southern territory called Judah, and that's where we get the word Jews from. And
Mhm.
then the Samaritans are the northern territory.
Yep.
So they are Israelites. They are descendants of Abraham. They are um, Hebrews. But geographically speaking, they are seeing each other differently because of geography and because of shared history. And Alex, you're right that one group was brought into exile, and then the other group stayed. And so the group that was brought into exile said, "Well, you guys stayed because you made deals with the Assyrians, you know."
Right.
And so it just goes on and on and on. But for the sake of this, it would be how would you best express this in a parable by saying a Samaritan?
I would say a Samaritan is like your cousin. It's the cousin, like, you left home, your cousin stayed in the hometown, and
Oh
you
yeah,
come back, and you don't, neither one of you want anything to do with each other.
okay, right, yeah, that's a very
Yeah.
good way of putting it. Yeah,
And so the Samaritan is the hero of the story
yeah,
because of, I think, this phrase. But a Samaritan while traveling came near him, and when he saw him, that's the key word. He saw him. Now, the other people may have looked at the victim here,
hmm
but the Samaritan saw him and he was moved with pity.
hmm
And that, I think, is at the heart of this story. When we see suffering all the time.
hmm
One might argue that we see too much suffering because we become desensitized to it.
right,
We see it in the news, social media, all these things, and it's good that we're aware of the suffering in the world, but we've become so desensitized to it that do we actually see it?
hmm
The Samaritan saw a human being. I think the Samaritans saw themselves lying there. And I think that's the whole point.
Yeah. So moved with pity. That phrase could be described as I saw the face of myself on this, my brother, right?
Yeah.
That the sense that I know what that feels like, and I'll do that. Now, for priests and Levites, they may have never felt that way, and so how could they have compassion? But
Yeah.
um, I have a story that fits into this. The only thing I don't like is that I was thinking about changing the story to make it about somebody else, but it just makes more sense if I tell it. Can I tell you briefly what it is?
Go for it.
All right. So last Thursday, I think, I was getting ready in the afternoon to go home, but I was buying ice cream at Publix because the Marshalls were doing an ice cream social Independence Day thing on Sunday after services. And so I had Christy on my Bluetooth in my ear, and I was heading into Publix because she and I were going to negotiate what type of ice cream to buy. And and then something happened. There was a man who was wearing a light blue golf shirt. He was in his, I would say, early 80s. He had two bags of groceries, and God told me to talk to him. Okay. Now, when I say God told me, it's not like I heard a divine voice booming out of heaven, speak to this man. It's not that at all. In fact, it's the opposite. Where I saw him, as in like what was happening in our parable today. I saw him, and then suddenly there was no sound. Suddenly, the normal sound of being outside of Publix disappeared. And then at the same time, I could see him, but everything around had turned white or out of focus, like a portrait. And this has happened to me before. I'm attuned to this. And so what I felt was the spirit was pointing this man out to me. And then in my heart, I felt this pulling that said, go talk to him. And so I walked up to him and I said, hi, how are you? And he said, well, I'm just fine, but I'm having all sorts of problems with my phone. And okay, what's going on? And he called a ride share service to get him back to his condo because he just was shopping, and it didn't work. He spent 20 minutes on customer service. Nobody could fix it. His phone was dying, and it was hot, and I could tell he was already warm, and he seemed really frustrated. So I said, "Where do you live?" And he told me that I know the condo building association, and it is a mile and a half up the road, super easy. And so I said, "Can I give you a ride?" And he looked at me like, "Yeah, that would be great." So I pulled the car around, and he got in the car, and I started driving him up to where he goes. And I said, "Just to let you know, I'm Dave. I'm an Episcopal priest. I serve at All Angels. And, you know, by taking a ride with me, it doesn't mean you have to come to church, but I sure would love to see you there." And he's like, "The Episcopal church isn't really my cup of tea." And I said, "Well, that's cool because we serve coffee and wine. We actually don't serve tea." And he started chuckling and he said, "Yeah, for 20 years, I was the president of the Unitarian Universalist Church in New Jersey, where I'm from."
Nice.
Yeah. And I said, so for those who do not know Unitarians have a sense, first, there's one God, and that God is expressed through many people. And so my experience with Unitarians is that they take the teachings of Jesus, the teaching of Muhammad, the teaching of Buddha, that they take all of these teachings, Moses, and they're all mixed in together without hierarchy, one over the other. And in many circles, in many Christian circles, Unitarians are often, well, they're the Samaritans, right? That we,
Yeah.
yeah. And so I said, well, it's fine. It would be great to see you. I took classes at a Unitarian seminary about healing and stuff. And I said, but there's one thing as we're pulling up to his condo, one thing for you to ponder. God told me to talk to you. And so you might want to reflect on the years that you've been here and you haven't been in church. God hasn't given up on you. Left it at that. Um,
Yeah.
so so who is my neighbor? He and I, obviously two different religious traditions, but God clearly highlighted this man and helped me to see him.
Well, I think, and thank you for that story. I think at the heart of what I heard in that story is that you heard, which is what the lawyer was supposed to have heard,
Right.
and you saw somebody. And of course, we're living in a time where it's very hard to do what you've just done because we want to feel safe. So we're not, a bridge between is not telling you to go and give rides to every random person. That's not what we're doing. But the question is how is God calling you to see somebody?
Mhm.
And I
Amen.
think that more than ever, seeing someone means actually seeing ourselves in that person and asking, how do I want myself to be treated? I was doing pastoral care for someone in a hospital that I barely knew. And I was trying to treat them well, treat them with respect, and be very loving and compassionate and listen to them. And they said, well, why do you do this? Is it because you're paid to do it? Because of the uniform? And I said,
Mm.
well, I like to think that we're called to love everyone. I said, but I do this because my hope is that, God forbid, if one of my members of my family, like my mother, were in a hospital or in a place and somebody would come to visit and care for her in the same way. So when I see you, it's like I'm looking at my own mother.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do this and you will live.
Yeah.
That the way to live is to first of all, once in a while, God will call on you, and it doesn't matter who you are.
Hmm.
God doesn't have partiality. Um, I um, I have experienced this before, and I've written it down and have practiced it. And the more that you practice it, the more easy or the more opportunities that one gets. But it reminds me of one of my mentors. He was in a hospital, and a nurse called him into a room of somebody he didn't know, and that person was starting to die.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so he walked in, and he was wearing a shirt very similar to the one I'm wearing now, black with a white tab. And the guy said, Father, I'm glad you're here, but I don't believe in God. And he said, well, God believes in you, and took his hand, and they started to talk and pray. It's that uh, do this and live. That it's the sense
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
reaching out and helping in the way that that we can. I had the ability to do what I did with this man. Others would have simply just pulled up a different ride sharing app on their phone and said, "How about I just pay for a ride for you?" Um, and this guy lives on Longboat. He has a condo. He clearly could have paid for it, but it's a sense of assisting and helping others.
But I think the other aspect of this is also charity is inherently about connection.
Hmm.
And so loving someone implies that there's going to be some kind of connection with them. And it's very visceral to see in the story, in the parable, that to bandage someone's wounds, you're going to get some blood on you.
Hmm.
So in other words, it's not just am I willing to see my neighbor and to serve my neighbor, am I willing to be in contact with my neighbor? Not everybody is ready for that. And so what I would say to our preachers and those who preach with their lives is, when you're presenting this sermon, when you're understanding what this parable means, focus on those physical details about what does it mean to be connected in the same space as another person, to be near another person. I've been in a lot of emergency rooms, both as a person who was waiting for somebody and unfortunately sick myself. There is a hugely isolating sense of being when you're in an emergency room, waiting room, because nobody wants to talk to anybody. Everybody's in their own little world, in their own little suffering, right? And we don't want to talk to anybody else because we don't want to be polluted or get sick by what's happening to them. That's not what this story is about.
No.
This story is about, you have to go into other people's spheres, other people's orbits, you might say.
Hmm.
So that's kind of where I've come
And
to
do
with
this
it.
and you will live. That I
Right.
keep coming back to. The one who gets Torah gets eternal life. The one who does this, and the flip side is that you and I need to talk about the grace of God, and
Mm-hmm.
that do you have to do work in order to be received into the kingdom of heaven? And maybe I shouldn't have done that with 3 minutes left on the board. Probably shouldn't
Probably
have brought that.
not. Maybe that's
Yeah,
for another day. But
that
I
might be
think
for a
that
different day.
I think the key here, as we would say, that is the common practice and understanding within Christianity for many people, is that doing does not give you grace.
Hmm.
Grace enables your doing.
Hmm. Exactly. So which came first, being able to see your neighbor and helping them and then understand Torah, or did you understand Torah and then you helped your neighbor? That's, I,
I
you
think
know,
that's a both and. I think that's a
it
both
is a
and.
both and it
Yeah.
all flows one into the other. So,
Yeah.
so for preachers that are pondering, how do I preach about Good Samaritan again? Um, that there are stories in your life and stories around us of people who have helped others, and that we can be attentive to the need because the need is great. And as we talked about last week, the laborers are few.
Right. Right. Well, Dave, I'm very thankful that both of us are people who are trying to see others. I'm very thankful that people have certainly seen us and ministered to us in our time
Good.
of need.
Yep.
And just my sincere prayer is we can go about eliminating these concentric circles and seeing one another as we are, which is created by God.
You bet. Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, Alex, I have very much enjoyed chatting with you about this, and I'm
Thank you.
looking forward to Sunday.
All right. And we'll catch everybody in the next one.
God bless.